So I mentioned the Colorado River, and we heard a couple sessions today about the Colorado River Compact. What can you tell us about that? And it does kind of seem like we're heading towards a crisis there. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, let's talk what a compact is first off. And Colorado was called the most compacted state in the nation. It's not because we're tiny and little compact, but because we have more agreements. We're the headwaters of mother of all rivers, really, right here in Colorado because we're at the Continental Divide. So southly on the Platte River, the Arkansas, the Rio Grande, all the Colorado River tributaries, those are our major river basins. So we have 9 interstate compacts. So a compact is nothing more, and here I've got a copy of one here. This is the South Platte Compact. It's not very long, it's like 8 pages. It came out of a concept that said, there was a person, here we're going back to Greeley again, here's Delph Carpenter, an attorney, came up with a concept of how in the world, this is 1920, okay, this is 100 years ago, how in the world do we come up with this, we have other states that are attempting to place demands on Colorado. And we look at what Los Angeles is doing, running pipelines 200 miles over the desert to Owens Valley, and you're going, uh-oh. And you have all this water developing, irrigation in the San Joaquin Valley and Imperial Irrigation District developing water supplies there. And we're thinking, now we talked about senior water rights a moment ago. Right. So we were like, uh-oh, if all these other states that are growing, especially Southern California, that are growing much faster and have a huge demand for water in the Imperial Irrigation that's supplying our vegetables through the winter, they're like, okay, they're gonna control our water, what they're gonna do, and we're not gonna have a say about it at all. And if we want to try to, if we want to try to get into litigation or with them, they'll outspend us 100 to 1. We're just little Colorado.
So the compact was a way to protect our interests,
yes,
to protect ourselves,
yes,
from these outside states, these outside cities from coming in and taking first dibs.
Exactly so. So and Delph Carpenter was, I'm out of adjectives for him, but what he was able to come up with was just pure genius. And his tenacity on making sure these things happened. So he was negotiating this whole big deal on the Colorado River. At the same time he was working on the Platte and other compacts around. But the idea is, let's have the governors of the states appoint a representative, or maybe 2, but a representative to sit down. Let's figure out what we want to do, and how we could fairly divide the waters, equitable apportionment of as best we can, and figure out how we can share this resource and avoid litigation. And we know it's 1920. We've got no stream gauges. They haven't been around for maybe 20 years, in some cases maybe a little bit longer, but we don't know how much water is really in the river. So he came up with this framework that where we would agree on how we're going to manage it. There were certain triggers and so forth, and how we were going to share the rivers. So in the case of the Colorado, which was the most famous, we date that back to 1922, although one of the 7 states, there were 7 states, Arizona didn't sign it till 1949, but we call it the 1922 Compact. So what they did was they had the 7 states, each with a couple of representatives, gathered in Bishop's Lodge, New Mexico, not too far from Santa Fe. They got the Herbert Hoover, at that time, the Secretary of Commerce, cabinet level position, in 1920. They gathered together in November of 1922, 21, and sat down and said, we're nailing everybody's shoes to the floor, and we're not leaving until we got an agreement. Can you imagine today the Secretary of Commerce of the United States pulling 17 days off of his calendar to sit down with 7 states and try to negotiate something?
Right.
I can't even conceive of it.
Well, not to mention the train ride out from D.C., huh?
Right, because once you're there, you're kind of there. So, and it was kind of a little isolated because they wanted to be a little isolated because they didn't want all the media feeding frenzy that was going to happen related to that. So they sat down, and Carpenter was just tenacious. We are not, absolutely not guaranteeing anything to other states, but we are having a framework for how we're going to work together. And so they basically divided the river into in half, an upper basin and a lower basin. The upper basin essentially being Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah, and said, right, this was before, there was no Hoover Dam. There was,
Right.
there was, you know,
Barry
there's no
Goldwater was
like
still leading raft trips up and down the Colorado.
There you go. So you didn't have any of that. So they came up. We're going to divide the river at a place called Lee's Ferry, and then they ended up building Lake Powell above it, and they of course built Lake Mead below it. And so we have a framework for an agreement, and basically what we're, in short, saying that we'll agree to not cause a depletion in the river. Now we'll agree to, in the upper, we being the upper basin states, such that we, over a 10-year average period, don't deplete the river, take more water than would allow a certain quantity to flow down. We're now well above that. Thanks to many good years, but the reservoirs, and that's what gets suppressed. Well, that's what reservoirs do, is they go up and down. If they were full all the time, well, what's the point of having one? You know, so they're always going up and down as we're managing those supplies. So after they sat and negotiated this, then they went through several years of getting that compact. It's not just those guys can't agree. They can agree, but it doesn't mean nothing until it's signed and approved by every one of the 7 legislatures. Verbatim, not a comma different, not a word different, it's exactly. So can you imagine taking a document around to 7 different legislatures today and trying to get them to sign off on, well, we negotiated this agreement over here, hope it works for you. And can you imagine people blow up? And then once you get done with that, then you notify the president, hey, all the legislatures approved it, now you get to go to the US Congress, because they've got to also approve them.